Hello, everyone. My name is Alana Cortez. I'm a conversational AI designer with CDIS, and thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on transforming the patient experience with conversational AI. I thank you for taking the time, and I was going to do a little intro on Deborah before we start. Deborah is an accomplished healthcare professional who has spent 18 years as a clinician with a focus on early childhood development, particularly speech and language development. She's also the founder and CEO of Balance, a health startup exploring the ways technology, including conversational AI, can be leveraged to improve patient outcomes and the overall safety and sanity of our healthcare system from womb to tomb. In addition to her practical experience in healthcare, Deborah has a healthcare MBA and is working towards another master's degree and PhD, both in health-related specializations. Somehow, and in the midst of all of this learning, teaching, and doing, Deborah finds time for plenty of leading through a variety of board positions, community projects, and most recently, as the new executive director of Women in Voice, an important organization that everyone on this call is, or should be, familiar with. In preparing for this introduction, I asked Deborah where her passion for healthcare springs from, with her ambitious vision and incredible workload, often in the face of opposition from people who don't believe in her or what she's trying to do. She replied with a big breath and then a bigger smile that she's focused on leadership that can drive change. And the first step is to inspire people to do and think about things differently, hence this webinar. On that note, I'll turn it over to Deborah.
Thank you so much, Alana. And that such a kind introduction. I'm really excited to jump into today's topic, and I'm hoping that this will spark lots of ideas, lots of questions, and just lots of conversations about what's possible with this technology that we have at our disposal. So I will go ahead and set up my PowerPoint presentation. I'm very old school like that, so that you can kind of follow along with me as I talk through this concept of bringing conversational AI into not just healthcare, but really a focus on transforming the patient experience. So let's go through some definitions, first of all, just from a perspective of wanting to make sure that we are all thinking about the same thing, but then also so that you're thinking beyond what sometimes people tend to think only about, which is the interaction between the patient and their healthcare provider. So when I talk about healthcare, I'm really referencing this ecosystem that comprises of all of these different players, because all of these different players do impact the outcomes that patients have in terms of their health. And that topic could be a whole other webinar. So I'm going to move on very quickly to talk then about how we define patient experience. And so this is a direct quote from the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. And so when we think about patient experience, what we're really talking about is all of the interactions that patients have with the healthcare system. So if you go back to that definition of healthcare, we're saying that ecosystem, all the interactions that patients have with the parts of that ecosystem, allow them to experience something that's either pleasurable or enjoyable, or something that contributes to worse health outcomes. And of course, I think we would all agree that we would prefer the most optimal experiences for all patients. And so definitions: conversational AI, any technology that users can communicate with. Of course, that's not the standard definition, but that's the definition that I think is probably the most accessible to anyone who's not part of this industry, because it gets them really thinking about how really anything that is facilitating communication can be included within this umbrella of conversational AI. So now, one of my favorite definitions: communication. So any interaction between the sender and receiver of a message that results in the sender encoding their message in a way that the receiver interprets as they intended. So that could be another webinar topic for sure, because I think we could all agree that sometimes when we think about communication, we think about talking, but sometimes talking does not result in your receiver interpreting your words the way that you intended. Again, I will move on very quickly, because I'm sure we can all relate to situations where we have attempted to communicate something with our words, but then our receiver interpreted something completely different than what we intended. In all those types of scenarios, even though we have said words, even though the receiver has heard words or whatever mode of communication, communication has actually not occurred because that interpretation was not present. So if you can think of a soundbite that would be a good to take away from this presentation, I would say it's this. A focus on patient experience promotes patient-centered care. And as healthcare consumers, this is something that we really want to think about, even as we are trying to design conversational AI flows specific to healthcare, because the goal of healthcare is or should be patient-centered care. And in order to promote patient-centered care, we need to think about what the patient experience is. So let's think about the drivers of patient experience. So we need access to culturally appropriate care, courtesy and respect, coordination of care, communication with health workers, collaborative decision-making, and then support for self-management and health literacy. We're going to talk about these a little bit more in depth later, but just for now, I want you to really think about how this differs from one patient to the next, and how really our goal when we're thinking about the lens of conversational design is to be able to capture what it looks like for each patient population, what it looks like for each persona to engage with a patient who is trying to access care in a way that's appropriate, in a way that's courteous and respectful of them and their needs, in a way that helps to facilitate communication between them and their health providers, as well as in a way that empowers them to make decisions that are going to benefit their health outcomes, and in a way that supports their ability to continue to manage whatever health conditions they have, or just manage their health status in general. So we'll talk really quickly about some of the challenges that are facing healthcare today. And this is really something that, again, it's going to differ from one region to the next. But everywhere globally, we are experiencing climbing healthcare costs. We are experiencing global challenges in access to quality care. In some regions more than others, there are significantly high rates of healthcare provider burnout, and that's causing some healthcare providers to leave healthcare altogether. And so that's increasing wait times, that's decreasing quality. And when you kind of add that to the reality that there is such a limit to how informed patients are about health conditions, about the things that they could do proactively in terms of prevention, in terms of self-management, then you've really got this just spiraling case of deterioration when it comes to health outcomes, when it comes to all of the things that we want to be able to promote in terms of patient well-being. And so when you really think about how we are approaching conversational design, it's thinking, how can we solve some of these problems through the lens of the patient experience? It's really saying, what role does conversational AI play? Not necessarily in reducing healthcare costs or access, but in really focusing the lens on what the patient is learning through their journey, what the patient is accessing through their journey, and how that learning and that access really changes the way that they're able to participate in the process, thereby reducing the burden on the system as a whole. So let's think from the perspective of the patient. So what are the patient's priorities? They're really not necessarily thinking about the health system that they are part of. They're not really thinking about their healthcare provider. They're not really thinking about all these different goals that health systems as a whole might have. They just want to solve a problem. They want to identify what is impacting their health. They want to identify what is disrupting their ability to function and engage in the things that they care about on a daily basis. And they want to be able to do whatever is going to help to minimize those disruptions. And they're always thinking about, how much do I have to spend to ensure that I can solve this problem and have as little disruption to my daily life as possible? And so one of the reasons why there's a lot of value in really stopping to think about what the patient's priorities are is that that allows us to design a workflow that addresses directly these priorities within that first step that the patient takes to access care. So let's take a look at the patient journey. So the first step is discovery. This is when the patient identifies the need to obtain care, whatever that care is. And so it could be anywhere from recognizing that there is a symptom that they're experiencing that's uncomfortable. It could be recognizing a symptom that they're familiar with as being associated with a particular health condition. It could be an external person saying, oh, I think that you should get this checked out. And sometimes you might have someone who is directly being referred to a specific health provider. Now, what's really interesting about the discovery stage is that patients often are not clear on what exactly it is that they want. So they know the outcomes that they're after. They know that they want to be healthy. They know that they want to be free of disease. They know that they want to be able to manage chronic conditions if that's something that they are dealing with. But the steps in between that desired outcome and the place that they are, the place that they're starting from, it's sometimes just a big black box. And so one of the things that can fill that big black box is information from sources that may not be the most reliable, information from past experiences, information that may just make it a lot more difficult for that patient to participate within the next steps of the journey. And so you go from discovery, which is where the patient is trying to access care, trying to understand what their options are, trying to find answers and to better understand what steps they need to take or what steps someone else needs to take in order for them to be able to reach the outcome that they want. And then you go from discovery to intake, which is the point where they are calling up a health provider's office or they're calling a hospital, they're going to the ER, they are accessing whatever institution that they've associated with the type of care that they need. And so that could be a phone call, that could be going somewhere in person, that could be, sort of accessing a virtual visit, whatever the case may be. What's happening during that intake stage is when they start to share information with this health provider or this health institution that they've identified as being that first step in solving their problem. And then at that point, you have this interaction between them and the health institution, between the health provider, between the health worker. And then it's then the role of that health provider to provide them with information that helps them to better understand what happens next. From intake, then the patient goes to screening and diagnosis, which is where they collaborate with the health provider to understand what their symptoms mean, to understand what steps may be recommended to manage their symptoms or address the problem. And usually there is a series of tests or there are conversations with the healthcare provider, and sometimes in between visits with the healthcare provider, there's not a lot going on other than maybe the patient going on Google to research the names of conditions that the healthcare provider might have given them. And so from the point of screening and diagnosis, the next stage is treatment and self-management. And this is where in many cases, the health provider is really driving the patient's participation. And so there are instances where a health provider might give a patient a list of recommended next steps or a list of procedures, a list of medications, again, depending on what the health condition is. And then there might be a list of instructions in there as well of what the patient can do to adhere to this regimen of care. And that's usually the point where the goal of the health provider is to monitor the patient's progress, to make any additional recommendations to manage their health condition, and then to ultimately be able to provide some type of trajectory for what care will look like from that point forward. And so it differs when you're thinking about an acute condition, like, maybe someone just needs to have surgery for a particular condition, and then after a few follow-ups, that period of care is done. It could be management for an ongoing condition that will really require sort of lifelong monitoring and care. So there's a bunch of different ways that this particular stage could go, but when we want to think specifically about the role of conversation design, I want to make sure that we're thinking about the things that are happening within these stages. And so discovery is about gathering information. It's about clarifying intent. Intake is about providing information, gathering information, and fine-tuning the process of intent, fine-tuning the process of receiving a specific service that then will require some level of communication, ongoing communication and ongoing interaction. And then the same is true for the treatment and self-management stages. So when we kind of think about how we can embed conversational AI into the patient experience, we're really saying all of those opportunities for communication that exist within the patient journey, that's an opportunity for conversational AI to support the health providers and health workers in getting information to patients in a way that they understand, so that the goal of that stage or that part of the journey will be met. Coordination of care, which is really ensuring that there is a process whereby all of the health providers and health workers involved in care for the patient are on the same page, they have access to the same information, and they are able to engage with the patient in a way that facilitates a better experience for them. And then support for self-management and health literacy, which again is really looking at that process of providing this ongoing stream of information that enables the patient to understand what their health condition is, what the next steps are, what they can be doing to support the outcomes that they want on an ongoing basis. So here are some examples and some of the ways that conversational AI is currently being used. And so I know there are lots of bots that help with scheduling appointments, canceling appointments, and lots of bots that do patient reminders and automated messages. I've seen some bots that will provide general answers about a specific condition or about a specific topic of health. And all of these are really, really great opportunities to be able to support the patient experience and to be able to enhance the quality of care that patients receive as they are interacting with their health provider. So now, one of the things that I'd like to do is to really think about this through the lens of a case study. And so this is a fictional patient who is attempting to access care for persistent migraines. And making this very general, although I will say that this is something that is not uncommon to the United States. So Flora lives in a majority English-speaking country. However, she's more comfortable communicating in Spanish. And so this, again, is a very general overview. And what you can consider as a conversation designer or as a healthcare provider is that this is a person who has a need or a problem that they're trying to solve. And one of the most striking things about the summary is that this is a patient who is going to be focused on relieving the painful migraines that she has. that is going to be her number one priority, because this is something that disrupts her quality of life. This is something that makes it hard for her to work. This is something that makes it hard for her to engage with other people, to go to places that she would like to go, because as anyone who has experienced ongoing migraines can tell you, it can be quite debilitating. And this is something that uh, for an individual who is otherwise healthy, they're going to want to get help as quickly as possible. So the other part of this case study that I wanted to highlight is the language barrier. And so in most cases, when we think about conversation design, a lot of the prompting, a lot of the design is happening in majority languages, is happening in English. And certainly there are some instances where there are Spanish speaking conversation designers. There are instances where primary English speaking conversation designers are using Google Translate or some other type of medium to translate from English to Spanish, and with the goal of improving accessibility for um, non-native English speakers. And this is something that it's really important to consider, because when we are talking about the patient experience, someone who is more comfortable communicating in a language that's different than the majority is also going to benefit from being able to access care in the language that they're most comfortable with, in a way that matches their ability to communicate. And so one of the things that I would recommend for anyone who wanted to design a conversation for Floor would be to really start the conversation with an option to speak to a voice bot, or speak with a chat bot in Spanish. And then being able to ensure that those conversation flows are designed to sort of accommodate or identify which Spanish speaking region she is from, so that the words and the phrasing will be a little bit more appropriate to the Spanish that she speaks. So when we think about the discovery stage, first step is to be able to clarify the need or the problem. And so this means designing a bot that can ask Floor some questions about why she is contacting the doctor's office or other health institution. And it's really one of the most important things to think about when it comes to language and communication is being able to understand the communication style of the speaker. And so as a conversation designer, what you're wanting to do is to give the person who's speaking, in this case, we can kind of insert Floor as the speaker. We want to give Floor the opportunity to describe why she's contacting the office that day. And within the content of her question or comment, there's going to be an opportunity to identify, well, is this a person who understands why they're contacting the doctor today? So if we use Floor as an example, maybe Floor says something like, I have really bad migraines. So that's pretty clear, and that gives you an idea of why she's contacting the doctor. And a bot might respond with some type of prompt to make an appointment with the doctor. But another layer is to be able to respond to Floor with additional questions, to be able to ask, when did this start? How often does it start? How bad? Maybe a rating scale, so that that's starting to collect a little bit of extra information to determine what supplemental information might be beneficial for Floor to start thinking about in terms of her options for care. And then also recognizing when is most appropriate to be able to hand her over to a human health provider or health worker so that there's an opportunity to identify, is this an emergency? Is this a scenario where more information is needed? Is this a scenario where an appointment needs to be made sooner rather than later? So this is something that can really be beneficial to Flor as a person who is experiencing something that is so life-changing and that she may not be as aware of, depending on the level of intensity, depending on just how much of an impact it is to her daily life. So next, we want to think about the intake process, which is really where you have the health workers and providers coming in, and they're interacting with Flor, and they are going to be giving her information about what her symptoms might mean, what tests they might need to set up, what additional appointments she might need to make. That's a lot of information. And it's very easy for someone who does not receive care regularly to become overwhelmed and to just be flustered by all the different steps, all the different stages, all the different appointments. And so here is where conversation design can really step in to provide that support to say, like, what kind of bot can we create to provide this information in a much more streamlined way? How can this bot create reminders and follow-ups, either by chat or by email? How can we support with coordinating these appointments so that there is a little bit more that is happening in a more automated way, as opposed to what can sometimes happen where there's a phone conversation or there's a visit and there's just a lot of information that is being provided to the patient, but maybe is either getting lost in translation or sometimes just lost in the flurry of day-to-day life. I mean, I think we've got many different use cases in conversation design where appointment reminders have really increased patient attendance. This is really one of those scenarios where we're going to the root of some of the things that can impact patient attendance to be able to provide that additional support and ensure that the patient experience is really what's driving the consistency of their attendance. So when we're thinking about the screening and diagnosis stage, this is the point where the healthcare provider has run their tests, has formulated some sort of diagnostic perspective, or is in the process of doing so. And again, there's a lot of communication here. There's a lot of information that's going out to the patient. And sometimes, because there's so much information, because it's sometimes can be very unfamiliar, there can be a barrier to the patient understanding their health condition. And sometimes it's the onus is on the health provider to ensure that they're using language that's accessible. But sometimes there really is this benefit to breaking down the information that the healthcare provider has in ways that are accessible to the patient outside of those interactions. And especially when we think about the way our health system is in the US, there just often is not enough time for healthcare providers to break information down. So what tends to happen is there is a lot of information that's written down. There are websites, there are emails, there are care portals, and it's a lot of information that, quite frankly, a lot of patients don't have time to read. And so the information is available, but it's not accessible, or it's not digestible in a way that can immediately transform that patient's experience. And so that's one of the opportunities where a bot, maybe an app on a phone, or part of a care portal can really be available to say, I know you just had this appointment with your doctor and you have all of this information. I want to be able to answer your questions that's specific to this information that's provided by your healthcare provider so that you can better understand what you were told during the appointment. You can go back to it as often as you want. and you're just in a better position to understand what's happening next and also what you can do to really facilitate this stage of your journey. And then when it comes to treatment and self-management, again, the same idea of being able to provide access to answers and information that are based on the healthcare provider's recommendations and help to understand or help the patient to understand their health condition, and then help them to understand the steps that they need to take for self-management, as well as understand how they can embed those self-management tips into their ongoing care. So if we think about Flor, for instance, let's say her doctor ran some tests and identified that the cause of her migraines was lifestyle related, or something that could be addressed through a specific series of steps that she can take, and that there really would be no further action required on the part of the healthcare provider other than possibly some monitoring or progress tracking to ensure that her condition has not come back or has not worsened. This is really an opportunity where Flor can benefit from a bot that reminds her what those steps are. Maybe even a bot that reminds her every day, hey, did you drink enough water? Did you take this action? Have you done this? And then again, being a repository of information that better helps her understand the value of taking these steps, so that instead of a one-time visit with a healthcare provider or this sort of slew of information that she's not going to read, she has access to something that she can reference every single day that's going to be part of her day, and something that makes it much more likely that she will engage with, as opposed to something that is happening on a one-off basis. And so one of the things to think about in regards to this is that this is a very, very general review of the ways that conversational AI can help to support this process for all patients, regardless of what their condition is, regardless of what setting they're in, regardless of what country they're in. But the reality, of course, is that there are so many other determinants of health outcomes that, we, that's another topic for another webinar, but really we can take some of these bite-sized areas, such as improving communication, improving education, and really helping to support the administrative parts of the patient journey, and always thinking from the perspective of what the patient is experiencing, based on who they are, based on what their background is, based on what their needs are, and based on what their priorities are. So, a few important considerations to keep in mind. Patient-centered care drives patient health outcomes. And so when we think about the patient as the person that we're designing this conversation for, we're also contributing to the health outcomes that they receive. And when we think about the technical pieces of conversation design, when we talk about intent, we want to remember that whatever need, whatever problem that the patient has is what's driving their intent. So the reason why they're calling the doctor, the reason why they're engaging with that health institution is because they have a need. And in many cases, all they're thinking about is the need, and all they're thinking about is how to meet that need as quickly as possible. And all of those things will impact the way that they engage, as well as who they are as a person is going to shape the way that they communicate and engage. And so, as part of the process of designing effectively for healthcare, one of the things that we want to think about is how we are getting to know who the patients are. So, thinking about specific patient populations, thinking about how they engage with healthcare as a whole, and then really thinking about what their needs are. And this is one of the most significant ways that conversation designers can partner with healthcare providers and healthcare systems to be better understand who patients are, what their needs are, and really how the providers and workers and other players within the health system are framing these problems so that the design reflects not only the perspective of the institution, but also the perspective of the patient, and really where that synergy comes into play. And so the last thing to keep in mind is that the patient's priorities will drive their actions. And so if a patient prioritizes a particular, access to a particular type of care, understanding that they are going to take action based on what those priorities are. And so we really want to be able to understand what a patient prioritizes, in each specific situation, because that is what will enable us to be able to identify how they might respond to a particular bot, how they might respond, how they might prompt the conversation, how they might respond to something that the bot might say in response, and really where that conversation might lead to. And because there is such a diversity in what patient priorities are, there really needs to be that process of intentional research into understanding who the patient is, and recognizing that every single person, every single patient wants to be well, but sometimes their priorities don't align with the things that might promote their well-being. And that's really one of the gaps that conversation design can fill in terms of education, in terms of empowering patients to better understand the parameters of the care that they're receiving and how that aligns with their priorities and the outcomes that they want for themselves. So this is a topic that cannot possibly be condensed into such a short webinar, but I hope that I've given you some really important things to think about. And one of the things that I'd love to do at this time is really just review any questions that anyone in the audience might have. All right, so I see some questions in the Q&A, so I will go ahead and start reviewing them, and we'll have an opportunity to, again, go through any other questions that come as I review the ones that have already been submitted. And so, so I see a question asking about the conversational AIs that are dealing with appointment booking. And I unfortunately do not have the answer to that question off the top of my head. I know that there are quite a few out there, but I imagine that um, many, if not all of the major organizations that are interfacing with healthcare organizations within the conversational AI space would handle appointment booking, because that is really one of the more fundamental aspects, or well, at least of the administrative process of healthcare delivery. So I have a comment here. Someone stated, a barrier, while I was studying this topic, a barrier I faced with medical information privacy and security. And how can these concerns be addressed, and what technologies can help? And that is an excellent question, because I think it goes back to really what the world is wrestling with now in terms of ethics in AI. And I know that one of the sort of more challenging barriers to face when it comes to healthcare and AI is the fact that healthcare is so much about, protecting privacy, and there are different organizations, different countries have different laws regarding privacy and security. And so I think this is one of those scenarios where you really want to be able to bring all of the stakeholders together to be able to discuss and develop the technologies that will ensure that all of these things can happen with a focus on maintaining patient security and privacy, and certainly being able to bring patients into the conversation so that there really is that core understanding of what those needs are. And I would be more than happy to share any resources that you might find helpful. I will go ahead and share my screen again just so that you can have my email address as a backdrop. So please feel free to send me an email if you have any specific questions. And also if you would like to receive any resources. And as I said, I'd be more than happy to share those with you. All right, going on to the next question. So someone asks, what kind of platform do you imagine this conversation to take place in? Are there use cases where this has already been integrated in existing platforms? So I really imagine that this will be very dependent on the health institution. So I can think about instances where if you are looking at a hospital, certainly that hospital has an existing digital platform where they set up and facilitate communication with patients. So usually it's a care portal or some other type of platform, and there's a website usually. So then those are really great opportunities for a patient to start a conversation with a chatbot and to be able to communicate with their health provider and other health workers. And so what's happening is the platform is really going to be dependent on what, you know, who the patient is and who their health provider is. But as long as that platform is accessible and secure, it really is, it can be anything. And so I can think of a specific instance where I've seen a chatbot be integrated into an online portal where it's a very basic chatbot, and it's not really a conversational chatbot. It just gives answers to very specific questions to confirm appointments and things like that. But there's really the opportunity to expand that even further. And examples of this in action, unfortunately, none off the top of my head. But really, this is a really good way to think about how to design something that meets these goals, and really thinking about the goals as being the problem that the patient is trying to solve and the need that the patient has, and then really being able to write out a flow that supports all of these functions on behalf of the patient. And so someone asks, what kind of metrics would you use to measure success for a conversational AI solution for healthcare? And so my first metric would definitely be the efficiency and the accuracy and privacy. And so really thinking about that in a very general way, but also thinking about it in terms of, you know, how long does it take for the patient to be able to obtain information that will get them closer to an appointment with a healthcare provider that will work with them to solve their problem. So that's a metric I want, like the shortest amount of time possible between the patient's identification of the need and the conversation that enables them to better understand what their next steps are. And then the amount of the accuracy of the information that they're obtaining to allow them to then make informed decisions about their healthcare, and certainly the security and the privacy of any information that they're sharing throughout the entire journey, so that they feel comfortable and confident knowing that they're not putting information out that's going to end up somewhere that they did not intend for it to. And so another question is, have you seen any examples of conversational AI helping children or patients communicate their pain with doctors? Are children usually able to explain their symptoms well using this technology? That is an excellent question. And I have not seen any examples, although I plan to be a major driver of this particular solution, just because my background is working with children who are not able to communicate their needs verbally. And some children use assistive technology devices, which is some form of technology, but really does not help to facilitate the type of interaction that will ensure that children are also enjoying the same type of experience that adults can, who have that ability to communicate verbally and do so in a way that helps to clarify their intent. And so another question says, in terms of privacy, what is the role of the doctor in supplying information about a third person, the patient, to a company? And what is the role and decision of the patient in it? Another excellent question that really goes back to how we want to always be thinking about the ethics surrounding this. And so the doctor's first priority is and should be their patient, and the patient should always be an active participant in this process. And so typically, I will say in the United States, and I would imagine in many other countries as well, the concept of really informed consent is one of the drivers of our approach to ensuring that patients are not participating in anything that they have not agreed to after they've had an understanding of what it means and what the potential impact might be to them. And really, any action that is on behalf of the patient should be or should come as a result of a conversation between the doctor and the patient, so that the doctor, if they're taking any action, if they're providing any information, it's because the patient understands what that action means and the patient agrees with that step that they're taking to provide that information. And so someone asked, can you speak on designing a virtual assistant persona and striking the right tone and language when dealing with users and sensitive medical topics? Absolutely. And I think that goes back to my earlier point about really thinking about who the patient is and where they may be coming from. And then in the absence of really having that information, being willing to very intentionally learn. And so in the same way that we would think about being responsive to each other as humans, that really comes from a place of being able to, in a sense, walk a mile in another person's shoes and recognize that what they might need to hear, how they might need to receive information that's a little bit sensitive or a little bit hard to take in, is going to be very dependent on who they are, but there are really general ways to approach this. And so it's really thinking, well, you don't want to give a lot of information all at once, and you really want to focus on reading or just determining the sort of the emotions of the person who is engaging with the virtual assistant. And I know that there's sentimental analysis that can do that, to be able to recognize, oh, this person's tone is suggesting that they might be overwhelmed right now. So this is really the time to uh, respond to what they're saying and identify that they might benefit more from an empathic tone. And certainly simple language is one of the ways to ensure that someone who's hearing information that might be a lot to take in at that time is taking in what is pertinent and is able to continue to engage in the conversation. Like, so many different examples, so many different really ways to look at it and think about it. And so that's certainly a topic for possibly another webinar, or if you want to connect offline, really great way to kind of flesh out some of the potential scenarios and really how best to address them. So I have another question. Can you reflect on some of the differences in patient need in a general practice context compared to interactions with secondary care or specialists? and how this might impact approaches to conversational design. And that another excellent question. I think certainly we can think about the patient journey as being the same, regardless of what context it is, but with certain nuances when you think about primary care versus specialty care versus, ongoing support for or management for a particular condition. And certainly there is an impact to the approach of designing conversation for someone who they are just coming in with no context for what their needs are versus someone who's been referred by a healthcare provider, already has some information and has an idea of what those needs are or what solutions exist. And, that person might benefit from sort of more action-oriented conversation versus someone who really would benefit from more education upfront. So I have another question. Have you experienced any uses of LLMs in the mental health and conversation design space that have been more accurate, empathetic, safe, and ethical, as well as human-like without falling into the uncanny valley? I have not, unfortunately. However, there is the opportunity to build what we need when we think about what patient health is. I think a lot of times people say, we're thinking about physical health or we're thinking about mental health, but the reality is that health and well-being is it is one thing. It's you can't really separate mental health and physical health because mental health is physical health. And that's another webinar topic, but I'll just say that there is enough that we now know in terms of research that really helps us to understand the holistic nature of human health and the need for healthcare that is going to really address all of the parameters of the human health experience so that those health outcomes will be complete and not siloed as historically healthcare has been. And I have another question asking if children are usually well able to explain their symptoms in general. It really depends on the age of the child and really what they have learned about how to refer to the parts of their body. And so it really, there are lots of different variables there. But in general, children who have access or have had access to words that can help them describe, if something hurts or if they generally feel unwell, are in a position to at least have a conversation that's facilitated by someone who might be better able to identify what they're trying to describe. And another question, unfortunately, I have 4 more minutes, so I won't be able to get to all the questions, but one more question says that a lot of bots cover treatment and cure, but none of them cover prevention. Do you think we will ever get to a point where digital services focus more on prevention, or are those flows more difficult to build for conversation AI, as I assume it would be difficult to build personas for such? And this is such a great question. I am a huge proponent of prevention. And one of the things that I think has happened is that because historically healthcare has been more focused on diagnosis and treatment than prevention, that what's been created has sort of reflected that. But one of the things that I think can come out of really the opportunities that we have within this landscape is to really be able to design for prevention. And a big part of prevention is patient education, which is something that bots can do if someone designs them to do that, to provide information in a way that's accessible, in a way that's digestible, in a way that enables the patient to be so well informed that they can participate in their health appointments. And certainly there are opportunities for patients who do wellness checkups where they're not going to address a particular symptom, they're just going to check on, their blood work, they're going to check on just their overall health status. Part of the appointment is providing information about their lifestyle. And certainly there are so many opportunities for information about prevention to be embedded before, during, and after these conversations, so that a lot of the preventable lifestyle conditions that many people suffer from can be avoided to begin with. And someone asked another great question. Oh my gosh, we're running out of time. To what extent is a code switching tone and diction bot important to the communication of healthcare information? It is important. It is very important, because that is really what enables the bot to be able to adapt to its user and to ensure that they are engaged in a conversation that feels comfortable for them, that enables them to access the whatever purpose the communication is for, and just ensures that things don't get lost in translation. And someone says, when asking conversational AI, is it necessary to build a rapport between the patient and the AI? Would this improve the patient's experience in explaining their symptoms and regularly using the tool? I think that is a very interesting thought to explore. Again, I think it's going to be very dependent on the patient, but certainly part of that whole process of communication and interaction is being able to support the patient's experience and make them feel comfortable about entering into a potentially overwhelming, confusing, or just stressful experience. And one of the best ways to do that, and one of the ways that I do that as a health provider, is I just focus on the person and I get to know who they are, ask how their day's going, and I just allow the conversation to lead to the point why they are engaging with me, so that they know that they are my first priority, and that, I want to be able to partner with them to help identify and solve their problem. And certainly there are ways to be able to bring that into the process of designing a conversational AI tool. So unfortunately, I am all out of time, but please send me an email. Please connect with me on LinkedIn if you have any other thoughts or questions. I would love to share books, resources, anything that might be helpful for you as a conversation designer, as a healthcare provider, as a student, as, whatever part of the landscape you're coming from, because there really is a lot of power in this process of learning and collaborating in a way that will help to meet these goals for patients. So on that note, I will wrap up here and I will hand it over to Ben.
Thank you very much. Just to say thank you to everyone that attended. Thank you to everyone for the questions. Thank you for Deborah, our host, Alana, for doing the introduction. There will be a recording that will be available in the next couple of days, and we'll be able to download all the questions as well and try and get answers for those wherever we can from Deborah and the team. So thank you all very much. I will close the webinar down now.
Thank you.